Welcome to Paskvan Podcast. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps this channel. Okay, so picture this scene. It's frozen in time, right? But not by ice, by fire. A home just utterly annihilated. Things melted into these grotesque shapes. In the air, you can almost smell it, thick with that acrid, smoky, despairing tang. Yet somehow, amidst all this total ruin, something impossible happens. One object is just untouched. Pristine, hanging perfectly straight on a blackened, scorched wall. And it's this really unsettling image of a child. Wide, dark eyes brimming with tears, this look of just perpetual sorrow. Today we're peeling back the layers on that core mystery. The enduring, really chilling legend of what everyone came to know as the Crying Boy painting. Now, this wasn't some rare piece of art. It was everywhere. A mass-produced print that somehow, against all logic, became tied up with misfortune, strange accidents, and maybe most terrifyingly, house fires that it just survived. Miraculously. So we're going on an exploration here into a story that truly gripped an entire nation.
It transformed this cheap piece of wall art into, well, one of the most infamous, genuinely cursed objects of the 20th century. It's a story built from hushed whispers, dark jokes, then amplified into this national panic by the tabloids. It fed on the deepest human fears, and it's sustained by that enduring, sometimes irrational power of belief. Our mission as we go through this together is to try and uncover the unsettling origins of this really eerie phenomenon. We'll carefully look at those first testimonies, we'll dissect the rational explanations alongside the more chilling supernatural theories, and ultimately maybe ponder why some stories, especially the ones tapping into our primal fears, just refuse to burn away, why they keep haunting us even decades later.
And what's really striking here, I think, is just the incredible speed. How quickly a sort of localized oddity, just a few strange coincidences maybe, could mushroom into this full-blown national hysteria. This isn't just about a painting, is it? Or even just the strange things happening around it. It's a lens, isn't it? A way to look at how we process fear, how we share it, and how powerful institutions like the tabloids can really shape what people think. And maybe, most fundamentally, that deep-seated human need we all have for an explanation when things get chaotic, when tragedy strikes and it just doesn't make sense. We'll definitely need to place this in its time, too. The social context of 1980s Britain, which was, a period full of anxiety, uncertainty. We'll touch on the psychology behind urban legends, how they catch on like wildfire. And crucially, the very real, sometimes terrifying impact this painted boy had on so many lives, turning everyday things into symbols of dread. It's a fascinating, sometimes quite unsettling look at belief and reality bumping up against each other. #tag unraveling the mystery of the Crying Boy.
Right, so the first sparks of this whole legend, those initial really unsettling embers, they didn't ignite in some, shadowy occult meeting or ancient book. No, they flared up in the most unlikely, but maybe the most credible place. The day-to-day, often harrowing experiences of Britain's fire brigade crews. This was back in the mid-1980s. Now, these men and women, they were hardened by their job, right? They'd see every kind of fire imaginable, kitchens gutted by grease fires, living rooms just annihilated by bad wiring, entire houses reduced to smoking shells. They knew devastation intimately. But then this unsettling pattern started to emerge, almost supernatural, really, from the ashes. After they battled these infernos, fires that just consumed everything, after the flames were out, the smoke clearing, these firefighters would, with really shocking regularity, find the same anomaly. A single, cheap, mass-produced print of a boy with tears running down his cheeks found just surviving, often hanging perfectly straight on a black and scorched wall, and everything else around it, furniture, photos, belongings, completely obliterated, melted, turned to fine ash. Just try and picture that scene. The sofa was gone, the cherished family photos, mere wisps of ash, the wallpaper burned to a crisp. But the painting of the Crying Boy was pristine, its vibrant colors unblistered, its surface unmarked, almost defiant. It was such a stark and impossible contrast to everything else. For the crews seeing this again and again, it wasn't just odd, it was deeply unsettling. It defied everything they understood about how fire works. I mean, imagine you're a seasoned firefighter. You see this uncanny survival over and over. What conclusions, maybe irrational ones, does your mind start jumping to? What explanation, however dark, do you grasp for?
Yeah, and that's the crucial point. It was far from isolated. This wasn't just one weird occurrence you could write off as a fluke, a statistical blip. No, this was clearly the start of a really unsettling pattern, one that quickly went beyond mere coincidence and started taking on a life of its own. And it wasn't long before the firefighters themselves, the ones right there on the front lines, started openly talking about it, noticing the same peculiar survival across different incidents, different parts of Britain. Sometimes, yeah, exactly as you said, the painting's just hanging there alone on a soot-blackened wall, untouched. Other times, maybe the frame around it, the wood or plastic, might be charred, brittle, maybe the glass cracked from the heat. But the actual image of the paper print would be strangely, impossibly intact. It was like the picture itself had some kind of immunity to the heat that destroyed everything else. For these men and women risking their lives whose whole job was understanding fire's destructive power. Well, this went way beyond coincidence. It bred this deep sense of unease, led to whispered jokes, often with a dark edge, and this growing feeling maybe. Maybe this was a cursed painting. It just stubbornly defied their logical understanding of fire.
So what exactly was this painting, the one causing all this fear? Well, it showed a dark-haired boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with these large, expressive brown eyes just brimming with tears. His lips were slightly parted, like he was about to sob or maybe gasp. And his gaze, it was fixed directly on the viewer, really intense, almost accusing, like it followed you around the room. There was no discernible background, just the child suspended in his sorrow, so his anguish was the only thing you saw, really. Inescapable. Now, this haunting image, it was actually part of a much larger, hugely popular series by an Italian artist, Giovanni Bragolin. Though he also used the name Bruno Amardio, he was painting back in the 50s and 60s. And his Weeping Children series, featuring lots of different distressed kids with those tear-filled eyes, it was a massive commercial hit. Straight away. These weren't high art for galleries, though. They were mass-produced as really affordable prints. Sold everywhere, department stores, market stalls, catalogs, all over Europe.
By the 1970s, copies of The Crying Boy and, his tearful friends, they were hanging in thousands and thousands of working-class British homes. For most people, it was decoration cheap, mass-produced art. Maybe bought for sentimental reasons or just to fill a blank wall. Nobody thought twice about it, just an ordinary object bought for a few quid. Nobody, that is. Until the fires. That's when everything changed. From mundane to terrifying, just like that.
Right, and this local curiosity, this unsettling pattern that was, initially just talked about among fire crews, it just couldn't stay contained for long, could it? What really becomes a kind of case study in media power here is how fast, how explosively it turned into a full-blown national panic. We can actually pinpoint a critical moment. September 1985, that's when Britain's best-selling tabloid The Sun, which was, let's face it, a master of sensationalism, ran this truly astonishing front-page story. The headline alone, wow. Designed to grab you, ignite fear, blazing curse of the crying boy. And the story they told felt chillingly authoritative. They quoted firefighters directly, claiming they were sick of finding the same cursed print in the ruins of fires. That gave it this immediate, terrifying credibility. The article even named a specific Yorkshire fireman who supposedly refused to allow the painting in his own house. Framed it like, a real safety issue. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this kind of media coverage doesn't just report things, it actively builds and magnifies a narrative. It takes a few scattered coincidences and weaves them into this powerful, fear-inducing story that shapes how everyone sees it almost instantly. Turns anecdote into truth in people's minds.
And the public reaction, it was immediate, overwhelming. Just this absolute flood of letters pouring into the Sun's offices from readers all over the country, desperate to share their own cursed experiences with the painting. And this is where the story starts getting wider than just fires, right? The misfortunes people blamed on the crying boy now covered this huge range of tragedies. We heard these specific heartbreaking stories. One woman wrote in, her house apparently burned down just 6 months after she bought the print. Another described this awful run of bad luck. Her husband suddenly lost his job. Her kids got mysteriously ill. Or right after the painting went up on the wall. Then a third person insisted they'd had 3 separate bad accidents, each one eerily following them getting the crying boy. The Sun, well, they knew what they were doing. They capitalized on this growing panic, actively encouraging people to send in their stories, just pouring fuel on the fire. Within weeks, they'd gathered dozens of these harrowing accounts, each new testimony just feeding the hysteria, making a personal tragedy into this national myth. Whether the stories were completely true, exaggerated, or outright invented, or just awful coincidences, the psychological effect, the result was the same: widespread panic. The fear was now a national contagion. The floodgates were open.
Exactly. And the painting, the curse, it provided this remarkably convenient, tangible thing to blame, didn't it? What's really fascinating to think about here is how the legend of the crying boy almost became this this lightning rod for all the broader anxieties floating around in 1980s Britain. It wasn't exactly a calm time, was it? The nation was dealing with huge economic hardship, industrial strikes, massive unemployment, just this deep sense of uncertainty about everything. So fires, accidents, general misfortune. Sadly, they were pretty common. And people, understandably, were desperate for an explanation for their suffering, something they could point to. The crying boy with that sad little face offered exactly that. The legend just leapt with astonishing speed from the tabloid pages into pubs, workplaces, schoolyards. It got everywhere. It wasn't just headlines. It was everyday conversation, a shared cultural shorthand for, inexplicable dread. And this brings up a really important question for us, I think. How much of a legend's power actually comes from that underlying societal tension, that collective psychological need that makes people receptive to it, giving a dark kind of order to a chaotic world? The painting basically became a vessel for all that collective unease, a stand-in for everything that felt wrong.
Yeah, and as that panic just spiraled further and further, people got really desperate. They wanted to get rid of the paintings, genuinely believing they were inviting disaster into their homes. The ways they tried to purge these things, they were varied, often quite dramatic, sometimes almost ritualistic. Lots of homeowners frantically, like it was an exorcism or something, just tore the prints off their walls, carried them outside to burn in backyard bonfires, hoping to destroy the bad luck. Others, maybe too scared to destroy it themselves, took them to local fire stations, begging the firefighters, the ones who first noticed the whole thing, to take them away, dispose of them safely. Still others, even more desperate, packaged them up and mailed them straight to the Sun newspaper, which by then had kind of set itself up as the authority on the curse, promising to collect and destroy every print sent in. And then there was that truly infamous, almost theatrical event. The Sun organized a massive public burning of crying boy prints, tossing hundreds of them into a roaring inferno. It was a spectacle, wasn't it? Designed to soothe the terrified public, this big ritual purge. But the irony, of course, was huge. The legend had grown so far beyond anyone's control, even as people desperately tried to burn it away. The very act of trying to destroy it just cemented its power, its notoriety, gave it a permanent spot in the Urban Myth Hall of Fame.
Right, so once the crying boy was firmly stuck in the national psyche, the big question everyone was asking, from tabloid editors to worried homeowners, was, okay, but what is the curse exactly? And what's really fascinating is just how many different theories popped up, each one reflecting different bits of human fear, superstition, our need to build a story around things we can't explain. One really common idea was the orphan's tragedy theory. This suggested the boy in the painting was a real orphan, tragically cursed with misfortune his whole short life. And somehow that deep sadness, that bad luck, got baked into the art itself. So misfortune became this transferable thing, ready to latch onto anyone who displayed his sad little face. Then you had the more overtly supernatural trapped spirit theory. This went full paranormal. This version said the boy wasn't just real, but he'd actually died tragically in a fire himself. His trapped, restless spirit, still grieving, maybe wanting an end to its suffering, became stuck in the canvas. And this implied this awful domino effect. Wherever the painting hung, fire would inevitably follow. Like the spirit was compelled to recreate its own death, forever haunting homes with the threat of flames. And a third theory, maybe even darker, involved the artist's revenge. Whispers went around that the artist, Bragelin, had this dark secret. He'd mistreated orphans, exploiting their suffering for money, maybe even cruelly making them cry for his portraits. So in this telling, the curse wasn't from the boy, but it was their revenge. A kind of cosmic payback for his cruelty coming through his art, bringing bad luck to those who bought it. The common thread in all these, though, different as they seem, is that deep human need to find meaning, even dark meaning, in suffering and chaos. But what's crucial to remember is that none of these tales were ever definitively proven, not a shred of real evidence, but it was exactly that lack of definitive answers that only made the legend more powerful. People could fill that void with their own worst fears, making the story stronger each time it was told.
Yeah, and right at the heart of all these swirling theories, rational or supernatural, was that single, most compelling, most terrifying detail. The thing that fueled the whole legend, gave it that chilling credibility. The painting's alleged resistance to fire. This wasn't a minor point. For many, it was the absolute, undeniable proof of the curse. Time after time, consistent reports from firefighters, from shell-shocked homeowners, described crying boy prints emerging remarkably unscathed from blazes that had utterly destroyed everything else nearby. The sheer detail and repetition of these claims made them so potent, so hard to just dismiss. Some eyewitnesses swore that when they tried to burn the painting themselves, maybe trying to break the curse, the flames would just mysteriously flicker out, or refuse to even catch the image properly. Others insisted that while the frame, the glass, might crack or blacken or even just disintegrate in the heat, the actual paper image of the sad boy, with those endless tears, would remain strangely, defiantly intact. Colors unblistered, surface seemingly immune. Can you really imagine the psychological impact of seeing that? When everything they owned, every cherished memory, every single thing was reduced to ash and twisted metal, and that one sorrowful face still stared back at them, untouched from the blackened wall. The effect was chilling beyond words. It wasn't just strange, it felt deliberate, malevolent, like defiance from something that scientifically should have been gone, cementing that terrifying idea that something truly unnatural, something deeply cursed, was involved.
And the mystery around the Crying Boy paintings wasn't just about the weird behavior of the art itself. It extended, maybe even more creepily, to its creator. What's really fascinating here is how the artist, Giovanni Bragolin, almost instantly got shrouded in his own shadow. Added another layer of deep unease to the whole legend. Very little was actually known about him publicly beyond being a painter in the mid-20th century. He was often described in hushed tones as reclusive, bitter, a man who rarely spoke of his work, a persona that just fueled people's imaginations. This lack of a clear biography, it created this incredibly fertile ground for whispers and dark rumors to just flourish, filling the void where facts should have been. Some whispered he'd been forced to paint suffering children as a punishment for some unknown terrible thing he'd done. Others suggested something more disturbing ethically, that he actively exploited orphans, even cruelly coaxing them to cry to get that raw emotion for his paintings, implying this chilling moral failure. And then there was the really dark rumor, bordering on the supernatural, that he'd made a pact, sold his soul, to capture the very essence of sorrow, effectively binding misfortune, this malevolent energy, into his art, cursing himself and his work. The mystery around the artist, his reclusiveness, these disturbing whispers, it all has deepened that sense of unease. The logical jump for many was simple. If the guy who made these was troubled, maybe even tainted, then maybe the art itself carried some of that darkness, that residual suffering. This raises a good question for you, listening, as you hear all these competing stories about the curse, about the artist. What parts really stand out to you? Is there one theory that resonates more, or do they all just contribute to the painting's enduring, unsettling mystique?
Of course, amidst all this national panic, not everyone jumped straight to the supernatural. There were definitely people, especially in scientific circles, investigators, who looked at the whole thing very skeptically. They wanted rational, explainable answers for why this painting seemed unburnable. One really prominent, very plausible theory was just about material science, that many of these mass-produced prints, especially the cheaper ones from back then, were coated with a varnish or sealant that made them significantly more resistant to heat and flames than, say, the wallpaper or curtains around them. We're talking things like certain cellulose varnishes, maybe even a basic fire-retardant sealant. It wouldn't make them fireproof, but it could make them char slowly, protect the paper underneath, instead of bursting into flames like everything else. And then think about where they were positioned. Most paintings, these included, were hung securely on walls. Now, during the chaos of a house fire, it's totally plausible that as the wall gives way or the flimsy frame burns, these prints could easily fall face down onto the floor, shielding the actual image from the direct, intense heat as the frame or paper around it collapsed. Being face down would act like a protective barrier, right? Keeping the worst of the flames off the painted surface. So the cumulative result, as skeptics argued, was that when the ruins cooled and investigators sifted through the debris, the crying boy might indeed appear remarkably untouched, even if the rest of the house was just rubble. It wasn't magic, they said, not spirits, just basic chemistry, physics, gravity, creating this powerful, really unsettling illusion of being invincible, just logic trying to push back against the fear.
And beyond just the physical properties, a really compelling counter-argument came from statistics. Probability. What's genuinely fascinating here is how often simple numbers can give a much more mundane but maybe more convincing explanation for things that feel mysterious or supernatural at first. Just think about how common these paintings were. By the 70s into the 80s, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of crying boy prints had been sold across Britain. They were everywhere, a super common fixture in countless homes, especially, as you said, in working-class homes where cheaper, more accessible decorations were really popular. Now, factor in the fires themselves. Statistically, domestic fires were also more common in these very same areas. often in older houses, less robust infrastructure, maybe using older heating methods like coal fires, gas heaters, all things that significantly increase the inherent risks of a fire starting. So to investigators, rational thinkers, the conclusion was almost unavoidable. Simple math, really. If the prints were absolutely everywhere on walls all over the country, then it wasn't just probable, it was statistically inevitable that they'd often turn up and burn homes. It was just sheer volume and distribution, not some supernatural force. The more something exists in an environment, the higher the chance it'll be there when something bad, like a fire, happens. Yet, despite these compelling, almost undeniable rational explanations, they stubbornly failed to quiet the pervasive unease. Which raises that huge question about us, about human psychology, doesn't it? Why do we often resist purely logical or statistical answers when something feels deeply unsettling? When it taps into our desire for a more dramatic, more mystical, maybe even more personal explanation for tragedy. It speaks volumes about how we handle certainty versus mystery.
Exactly. And that's where the mind's influence, especially that powerful thing called confirmation bias, really kicks in. This theory basically says we have this tendency, right? Once an idea, like a curse, gets planted in our heads, we subconsciously start noticing and actively remembering the times that confirm that belief. And at the same time, we ignore or downplay the thousands of counterexamples where nothing bad ever happened to a crying boy print. It's like you buy a distinctive new car, maybe a bright yellow one. Suddenly, everywhere you look, you see that same car. They were always there, but now your brain is primed. It's looking for them. The crying boy, once the curse idea was out there, became that kind of mental filter for tragedy. And once The Sun, with its massive reach and sensationalist power, published that front-page story, it didn't just report something. It actively created this potent feedback loop. Every tragedy after that, every house fire, every bit of bad luck that could possibly be linked to the crying boy became news. These stories got reported widely, eaten up by a public gripped by fear, thus feeding a self-perpetuating loop of fear and belief that just got stronger every day. For people already feeling unlucky, already struggling with hardship, the painting became a strangely comforting scapegoat. It offered this weird, irrational comfort by letting them point to something external for their misfortune. It literally gave chaos a face, something concrete to blame, which is often easier than accepting the cold randomness of life, isn't it? The mind prefers a cursed object over a meaningless accident, it seems.
Mm-hmm. But even with logic and psychology chipping away, the paranormal explanations kept offering this deeply compelling alternative for a lot of people. What's truly fascinating here is how these supernatural theories often provided a story that felt much more satisfying, more complete, more emotionally resonant, especially for people dealing with genuinely inexplicable, devastating events. One of the most enduring ideas was that the boy in the painting had tragically died in a fire himself. In this story, his trapped, still grieving spirit became inextricably embedded in the canvas. This spirit, people believed, wasn't necessarily evil, but just compelled to recreate its death, meaning wherever the painting hung, fire would inevitably follow, like the spirit was seeking release or just stuck repeating its trauma. Then there were even darker whispers, suggesting the boy was not human at all, but a malevolent entity, perhaps a demon disguised as a vulnerable child. His tears in this version weren't sadness, but a cunning lure, designed to get sympathy, draw chaos, destruction, bad luck into the homes where he was displayed. And for believers, the painting's stubborn refusal to burn became the ultimate, undeniable proof of these theories. Fire, they argued, couldn't destroy what was already born of it, or what was already supernatural. It's really fascinating is how all these wildly different interpretations, rational, paranormal, they're all basically a human attempt to impose order, right? To find a coherent explanation, however fantastical, for something that deeply unsettled an entire nation. They're all trying to answer that big why.
To really understand the lasting power, the sheer longevity of the crying boy legend, we have to put its rapid rise right into the turbulent social climate of 1980s Britain. This wasn't a calm era at all. It was deeply challenging, marked by anxieties that ran through society. Unemployment was soaring, social unrest was simmering, often boiling over. Economic strain was just a daily reality for so many families. And that atmosphere of unease, vulnerability. Everyday misfortunes like house fires, accidents, personal hardships, they were tragically common. And in that fertile ground of collective anxiety, the crying boy became more than just a painting. It kind of transcended art to become a profound symbol of collective suffering. A haunting face that seemed to effortlessly embody the sadness and underlying angst of the times. The tabloids, especially The Sun, with their knack for tapping into the national mood, masterfully amplified this burgeoning phenomena, openly feeding public fear for increased circulation. They saw a powerful emotional story that sold papers like crazy. And the public, desperate for an outlet for their unease, maybe needing a tangible explanation for all the bad stuff happening, they eagerly embraced it. The painting became this unsettling mirror, reflecting the nation's anxieties back at itself, providing a weird kind of comfort in a shared concrete scapegoat. It was more than a picture. It was a societal symptom, a focal point for a generation facing huge challenges.
Absolutely. And if we broaden our view, connect this to the wider psychology. The crying boy isn't some isolated, weird thing. It actually fits almost perfectly into the known psychology of cursed objects. Think about other famous examples, right? The Hope Diamond, bringing misfortune, or all those stories of haunted dolls like Robert or Annabelle carrying spirits. What all these share with the crying boy is that crucial sense of intimacy. Unlike a distant disaster or general economic problems, a cursed object is intensely personal. You can touch it, own it, invite it into your home, put it on your wall. That closeness makes the potential threat feel much more potent, immediate, terrifyingly real. And when inevitably misfortune strikes, job loss, illness, a fire, it provides something tangible to blame. It offers that comforting, though irrational, explanation for random chaos. It gives people a sense of control over things they can't control. The crying boy being so common, recognizable, and inherently unsettling with that sad gaze. It fit this pattern perfectly. Its expressions seemed to accuse, mourn, linger in your vision, made it an ideal canvas for people's anxieties. And the fact they were everywhere meant it was always there when something bad happened, making those coincidences feel like undeniable proof.
So the initial frenzy, that huge national panic in the mid-'80s, it did eventually start to die down. People had, burned their prints, given them away, stuck them in attics, hoping to banish the bad luck. But even after that massive purge, the story lingered. The legend had dug itself deep into the national consciousness, became a fixture in British folklore. Any time a fire hit a home, that, against the odds, still had a crying boy print. Those old questions would surface again, wouldn't they? Whispers of, was it just coincidence? A fluke? Or chilling proof the curse was real, just waiting? What's particularly interesting as time went on is the ambiguity that started creeping in around the curse itself. Some families, maybe defiant, maybe just unconvinced, refused to get rid of their paintings, claimed they brought no harm at all. Even more intriguing, a few people actually claimed the image protected them. Told stories where homes around theirs burned, but theirs with the crying boy on the wall was untouched. So, the curse, it seemed, could be read two very different ways. Destruction and misfortune for some, but a strange, inexplicable protection for others. And this very ambiguity, this lack of one single outcome, only made the painting more mysterious. It let the legend adapt, evolve, and ultimately survive. Today, despite all the destruction, loads of prints survived. You still find them in antique shops, secondhand stores, and of course all over the internet. And sellers, knowing its infamous reputation, often play up the legend in their descriptions. They know that chilling story actually increases its value, its desirability for collectors, the morbidly curious.
And then the internet arrived, late 90s, exploding into the 21st century. And it gave the crying boy legend this incredibly powerful second life. What's really fascinating is how these new digital platforms, any early forums, blogs, then YouTube, didn't just resurrect the tale, they took it global. Far beyond Britain, paranormal investigators started discussing it online, dissecting the claims. Amateur ghost hunters, YouTubers, filmed themselves buying prints, trying to burn them, testing that legendary fire resistance, often with, dramatic but inconclusive results. And with this digital revival came a whole new wave of modern sightings, contemporary experiences. Reports trickled in from new owners worldwide claiming weird things happened after they got the painting. Electrical failures, strange noises, sudden runs of bad luck. One guy told this chilling story about his cat refusing to even enter the room where the print hung like it sensed something. Another claimed the glass cover spontaneously shattered during dinner. No reason. Which naturally leads us to ask, were these just new coincidences amplified by the internet? Or did the curse itself, if it existed, somehow adapt to a new century, manifesting in more modern ways? For the true believers, of course, the crying boy was timeless. Its power transcended eras, technology.
Yeah, and as the story kept spreading across these new platforms, the legend itself started morphing, diversifying, spinning off new variations, even more specific, intricate details. Some versions insisted there was more than one crying boy, maybe dozens of different children whose portraits were cursed. Which wasn't totally baseless, because Bragelin did paint a whole series of weeping kids, and many of those prints got tangled up in the main curse legend. Other stories got really specific, focusing on one tragic boy, often called Don Bonillo. This orphan, the tale went, allegedly started the fires himself before tragically dying in one. His spirit, supposedly, was then trapped in the painting, doomed to haunt anyone who owned it. Now, absolutely no evidence ever backed up this specific Don Bundio story, but it quickly became one of the most popular explanations, endlessly repeated online on creepypasta sites YouTube. The painting through all this was truly no longer just art. It had become pure myth, transformed from a simple commercial object into this rich, evolving, terrifying narrative shaped by collective fear and imagination.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is how this whole journey from forgotten art to national panic ended with the crying boy becoming this genuine pop culture footprint. It pops up in documentaries about urban legends, magazine articles on the unexplained, even horror fiction and films. It's become this instant shorthand for cursed objects, right up there with haunted dolls. Especially for British audiences, it's still this indelible cultural touchstone. A vivid, unsettling reminder of that bizarre mass hysteria. Sometimes, yeah, it's treated with dark humor. People joke about hanging it in their annoying relative's house or using it as weird supernatural burglar repellent. Yet, beneath all that humor, a palpable, lingering unease persisted. Even as a joke, it carried this unsettling weight. So why does it persist? Decades later, part of it has to be the raw power of the image itself. The boy's face is profoundly haunting, vulnerable, yet accusing. Those big, teary eyes seem to follow you. The tears look eternally fresh. It invites projection, doesn't it? A canvas for our fears. Another huge reason is the timing. That perfect storm in the 80s. Tabloids needing sensationalism, a nation needing someone or something to blame for hardship. And finally, maybe most importantly, it endures because it just resists closure. The rational explanations are there, they're compelling, but none are absolutely definitive. Every fire that still seems to spare a crying boy print, even now, just adds more fuel. Every new story of bad luck, however coincidental, keeps the curse alive online. Without a final answer, the crying boy stays suspended. Right. Forever weeping, caught between truth and legend, you can still find them. In pubs as a curiosity, antique fairs online. Valued now as much for the story as the art. For some, owning it is a thrill, tempting fate. For others, it's still absolutely taboo, an object they wouldn't let near their home. Hashtag, tag, outro.
Wow. So we've really journeyed deep into the unsettling origins of the Crying Boy legend. From those chilling discoveries in the ashes to the media explosion and that complex tangle of rational explanations and supernatural theories trying to make sense of it all, this story, more than anything, it's a profound reminder, isn't it? Of the immense power stories have to shape our reality, to turn an ordinary mass-produced thing into something extraordinary and undeniably terrifying. Whether you end up believing in the curse or see it as this fascinating psychological case study, one truth just remains undeniable. The crying boy has endured. His sorrowful eyes still gaze out from walls, from antique shops, his tears untouched by time, his unsettling story etched into our collective memory, a permanent part of modern folklore.
And it really compels us to ask a final, quite profound, maybe unsettling question, doesn't it? If a curse objectively isn't real, but enough people truly believe it is, does that collective belief itself essentially create a kind of enduring shadow, a psychological weight that becomes its own form of reality? Is the real curse maybe not the fire or the bad luck that might follow, but actually the inability to truly look away from that haunting, tear-streaked face, that pervasive feeling that somewhere, somehow, that painted boy is still watching his silent tears falling, eternally waiting for us to make sense of his sorrow and perhaps, in doing so, make sense of our own deepest fears?